want to announce our first plenary speaker of the day, and that's Khanjan Mehta. And he is the founding director of Humanitarian Engineering and Social Entrepreneurship, as well as an assistant professor, engineering design at Pennsylvania State. Khanjan has led many technological-based social ventures in Kenya, Tanzania, India, and many other places. And some of these range from telemedicine to biomedical devices, low-cost greenhouses, and I'm sure he'll tell you a lot about these. And he also is responsible for doing a daily cartoon series, Frame Changers, and you'll see some of these out on the hallways here, so if you want to discuss those. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Khanjan to come forward. Are you wired up and turned on?
All right. Good morning, folks. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for the kind introduction, Kathleen. I'm going to get straight to the point. The organizing committee asked me to talk about how do we translate our technologies, our passion, our resources into sustainable impact. And over the next 40 minutes, I'm going to share with you some of our ventures, what we do and how we do it, some of our research findings, and some very strong opinions on where we need to go from here. So before I get to that, I'm going to quickly talk to you about what I do in my program in HESE. We work on global development challenges. Everything we do is integrated in a series of 5 courses. So this is an academic program. It's not student clubs, though we have several student clubs on campus, and we do recruit from them. But we have a course on social entrepreneurship that focuses on developing business strategies for technology ventures in the developing world. We have a seminar on design for developing communities, a project-based class in humanitarian engineering. We conduct fieldwork in Kenya, Sierra Leone, and some other countries. And finally, we have a post-travel class on reflection and research dissemination, which has 3 concurrent tracks of ethical decision-making, grassroots diplomacy, which is about how do you get work done in a radically different cultural context in a harmonious manner, and finally, research dissemination. So over the years, we worked on everything from energy to food, and we've ultimately settled on 2 areas. One is food value chains. So we work on low-cost solar food dryers. We have a pizza cart venture, and one of our products that somehow became pretty successful are actually affordable greenhouses. So greenhouses sell for over $2,500 in parts of East Africa. Our greenhouse costs about $500, and the typical return on investment is 2 to 3 crop cycles. More often than not, it's 2 crop cycles. So we have about 75 of these out there. We've licensed our technology to a for-profit company based in Kenya, another one based in Cameroon, and now we are trying to do exactly the same thing in Sierra Leone and Mozambique, which are arguably 2 of the most difficult countries to work in. We also work on telemedicine, and we do a lot of work with community health workers. We do low-cost biomedical devices. This is a $10 pulse oximeter. This is one of our spectacular failures, and why, I'm going to tell you in a few minutes. But this is something that we are very excited about right now. We are designing low-cost test strips for screening people, essentially screening women, pregnant women for UTIs, and to screen people for diabetes. And the beauty of this device is that you can actually print it on an inkjet printer. So you remove the ink, you put in special chemicals, and you print an entire page with over 100 test strips, and that way the cost per test strip is less than 5 cents. We can sell it for 10 cents, and our health workers can sell it for about 30 to 40 cents, and everybody makes money across the chain. So that's the basic idea. So in essence, we designed with communities, but we commercialize for markets. We take a very market-centric focus. We make a lot of very hard-nosed decisions. My program has 3 goals, and they are impact, impact, and impact. That's what matters. We also, all our students are required to work on original publishable research approved by the Human Subjects Boards. And over the last 6 years, we've published about 76 papers. We have 22 in review, and we have over 40 in preparation. The vast majority of these articles have undergraduate students as the lead authors. And I have about 12 of my awesome students here, and they're here for a simple reason. This is an excellent forum for them to disseminate and share and learn from others, and get a cool publication on their resume. All right, So where do we go from here? And I believe that this is mostly my soapbox from this point onwards. So I think that there are 4 thrust areas that we should be focusing on. 1, we need to focus on execution. We need to focus on the implementation strategies. 2, we need to focus on very practical partnerships. 3, we need to reframe research and reframe the purpose of publication. And finally, we need to change the conversation in several different ways. So let's talk about execution. But before we do that, let me do a very quick run-through of some basic questions that I'm sure we are asking ourselves as we design technologies for resource-constrained settings. Tyler Valikett was here last year, and he did an excellent job talking about user-centered design. And he talked about a lot of things like, is the technology we are developing, is it affordable? That's a $5,000 solar food dryer. It cannot, most people in the developing world cannot afford it. Is there a business model? That's a play pump that pumps water from point A to point B. It's a merry-go-round. You've seen it before. It's a great technology. It works, but it costs $1,000. Most people in the developing world cannot afford it. The business model was to put advertisements on the tank, and it tanked. And so you don't see many of these anymore. Is it desirable? We are working on low-cost solar food dryers that have a BOM cost of about $120. And we talked to 30 farmers before we did this. When we went back to them and said, hey, here's a solar food dryer. Look, it works. They said, well, yes, we would like to make some money, but we are farmers. We are not entrepreneurs. That's not our job. We are going to be happy just doing the farming. That is somebody else's job. So is it desirable? Does it meet every need? I've traveled across 45 countries, most of them in the developing world. I grew up in India. I've never, ever seen a solar food dryer, solar food cooker on display. And I can't imagine cooking my broccoli and tofu in that cooker either, or making my pizza in that cooker. So there are sensory needs that need to be met. Is it beautiful? That's one of our greenhouses. And in about 18 countries, we'll actually take away your money and sell it to you for about $600. We got some funding from EPA to test if we can replace the glazing, the plastic covering, which is pretty expensive and it's always imported, with low cost, with rice bags coated with specific materials. And that would bring down the cost by $100. We did some testing. We went back to farmers, and they said, you know what? At the end of the day, we would rather pay $100 more, but we wanted to look just as good as our neighbors. So those rice bags were not sexy enough for them, so it has to be sexy. Who's going to manufacture it? And this is one of our failures. This device, it can be mass manufactured for less than $10. If you look carefully, it's actually solid metal. It's going to survive harsh environments. But there is one problem. If you have a company that sells a pulse ox for $100 and your profit margin is $70, why in the world would you sell a device for $10 on which your profit margin is $3? Just doesn't make sense. You need very different kinds of business models that are beyond our reach. Will it hurt the environment? Is it socially acceptable? You've heard all about treadle pumps and how they work great in some parts and not in other parts because the sway of the women's hips is considered provocative. So there are some men who are really happy about it and some who are not. And between those two groups, ultimately the technology does not sustain. Will it reach the people? The last mile challenge. This is one of the biggest challenges we have. We have so many products out there. Getting them in the hands of the people is where the rubber hits the road. And finally, the big question is, will it scale? You can design a solution for 10, 100, 1,000 people, but when you think about designing something for hundreds of thousands of people, which is how we have to think, the equations change. And then you have to look very closely at why ventures fail. So, when we talk about sustainable solutions, it means 4 simple things. They have to be technologically appropriate, environmentally benign, culturally acceptable, and economically sustainable. All 4 aspects are just as important. It's like balancing a Wheatstone bridge. We have to do all 4 at the same time. So why do ventures fail? We conducted a study over 3 years. We looked at food value chains and agricultural technologies that strengthen and streamline food value chains. That's the entire journey from production to processing to storage, marketing, distribution, and consumption. And we looked at over 120 projects. We spoke to 500 actors in these food value chains in 4 different countries in Africa. And we talked to 25 experts, some in academia and some practitioners in the field from IDE, Paul Pollack's company, and a few others. And here's what we found. We looked at failure modes across 3 phases, across the design, the implementation, and the maturity phase. And if you've not seen that graph before, that's a typical venture life cycle. It all starts with an idea. At some point, you might have a prototype, you do a bunch of pilots, you might launch your company. Someday you will actually have positive cash flow, and you scale it up from there until you become a mature company. So across the design, implementation, and maturity phases, here's what we found. These are some of the failure modes during the design phase. Failure to meet a need, issues of manufacturability, limitations of the designers, usability, complexity, culture, and context. Culture was just one of these. And I hear a lot of narrative on how it all fails because of culture. Yes, it does, but that's just one aspect. And frankly, a lot of these companies, a lot of these ventures got past the design phase. They failed during the implementation phase. That's where you have the largest set of challenges. Challenges like access to capital, maintaining trust in your product, the pricing strategy, gender dynamics, customer education, strategic planning and pivoting, partners and champions, product quality control issues, the operations of your organization, competition management, team dynamics and incentives, and legal issues, especially switching from the informal economy to the formal economy. And if you look closer, half the issues from 7 to 12 are mostly internal issues, internal to the team. And a lot of ventures fail because a team that set out to do something fell apart, in a nutshell. And finally, during the maturity phase, you have a whole bunch of other issues like stakeholder management, marketing, operational management, legal challenges, standardizing the concept of operations, continued innovation, and supply chain challenges. The big one, the gorilla in the room, is standardizing your concept of operations. What does that mean? It means when you go to Chipotle, there's a very standard process that you go through. When you go to Subway, 32,000 restaurants, they have the standard formula. How will you standardize operations for your venture? And beyond a certain point, scale becomes harder because your overheads increase, and you don't have the margins to make up for those. And that's where a lot of ventures fail. Anyways, so what? There are a lot of things we can learn from these, from the study. By the way, we've done a very similar study on mHealth ventures as well. And mHealth is even worse because over 95% of mHealth ventures fail because there is absolutely no practical business model to sustain them. There are very few that actually succeed and survive. So what are the takeaways from this? One, the question when we're working with communities is not what the problems are. The question is, what are the problems for which we can design and deliver sustainable solutions? And we should only be touching what is gold, and we need to pick the problems very carefully. Second, and this is somewhat conceptual, so excuse me for a minute, but the point is this: at the end of the day, the goal is not the solar food dryer that dries food products. The goal is to do something that creates value, like drying tomatoes, or drying fish, or drying bananas to extend their shelf life from a few weeks to a few months or even years. And when you do that, the solar dryer, which is what we tend to focus our energy on, is just one part of that process. There are a bunch of other things that happen before. It could be slicing it, a salt bath, sulfur bath, and a bunch of things that might happen after. So the fundamental unit of value creation is not the solar dryer. The fundamental unit of value creation is this process that creates value, solves a problem, and ultimately makes money for somebody who is interested in making that money. So when we design products and services, for us, it comes down to designing this slice. It comes down to designing the ensemble. Not just a solar dryer, but every single thing that needs to fit together, the education that needs to go alongside to make this work and to make money. The goal of my program is not to make money. The goal is to make a lot of money. Ultimately, that's not the metric of success, but if you don't go and make money, it's not going to survive in the context. And this also leads us to something very basic, which is when you take this approach, then there is a huge overlap between the design of the product, the design of the concept of operations, which is that process, and the design of the business model to make it sustainable. And this increases your design space significantly. So if you're trying to figure out if you're trying to spec out your solar dryer, and you might realize that we get only so many hours of sunshine a day, and so why can't we just move some of those processes into the pre-processing stage and put a $100 manually operated centrifuge that gets rid of the first 50% of the water, and so you're optimizing what you're doing in the solar food dryer. And you could do a similar optimization for labor needs to try to optimize your profits. And people in the developing world are incredibly smart, and you're going to hear all about it from Dr. Gupta, who's been a phenomenal champion for indigenous knowledge. But this is what we should be doing, designing ensembles and figuring out what is that minimal unit of value creation, and it's not the technology. So changing gears, for our health workers, this is what an ensemble looks like. An ensemble for this community health worker is her backpack, her weighing scale, her blood pressure device, her device for giving people their blood glucose numbers, her test strips. It's a white coat that she wears. It's the badge she gets. It's the permissions from various people that she has in her backpack if the cops pull her up and try to get a bribe from her. It's all of those things and the training that goes with it, because that's what creates value for her. And she goes out and makes twice, thrice as much money as she would make otherwise. So let's design those entire ensembles and not just focus on the products. And the third key takeaway is the execution strategy. We did another study where we looked at the appropriate technology literature over the last 35 years and how it has evolved over time. And there were 3 takeaways from it. One was about bilateral knowledge transfer and melding indigenous knowledge with Western knowledges. And the other 2 came squarely down to a lack of implementation strategy, a lack of execution strategy. Because the person who is an expert in thermodynamics and knows all about solar food dryers believes that he or she knows just as much about how to get that solar food dryer in the hands of the people. But that's not true. They are 2 very different skill sets and areas of expertise, and we need to respect that. That journey, that going from point A to point B, does not look like that. It looks like that. It's as much of an art as it is a science, and we need to develop that art and science further. We need to communicate it. If you've heard USAID's narrative, they've been increasingly talking about implementation science, and that's what they are talking about. How do you make this happen? And another thing we noted in our study was that most of the ventures that got to the maturity phase went through anywhere from 10 to 20 different intermediate business models before they got to steady state. Almost none of them said, this is our steady state business model and we're going to get there directly. So you have to keep pivoting, and you have to think about it in terms of stages on how you get towards that ultimate goal of sustainable existence. The second thrust, and how do you get there? It is through practical partnerships. Our venture teams are extremely multidisciplinary. Half the students are engineering students. The other half come from every single college across campus, from liberal arts to health and human development to medicine to law to wherever else. Every single college is represented. Over 50% of the students are women. 55% of the students are women, and this is a 5-year study. I'm going to share some results with you in a bit. And these are freshmen through PhD students. Over time, as we become more and more rigorous and focused more on impact, the grad students have dropped off, and we have about 85% undergrad students now. And they are the ones who get stuff done. One of our biggest problems is building pipelines into our program, because this is a lot of work. And so the way we do it is we might have a bunch of core teams which engage about 50 students, but then we have a seminar on design for developing communities, which we actually stream live. And then we carve out projects from our core teams and farm them out to a whole bunch of other classes. From a junior class in bioengineering design, to freshman design, to an adult education class, to graphic design class, doing a lot of taking care of our design needs and so on. And that way we engage up to 800 students more. And this is how we scale up engagement. This is how we try to change the conversation about what engineering is and what engineers do. And this is a valid career pathway. We have 3 key takeaways. Our partner networks are pretty diverse. We work with a lot of communities. We work with a few universities, not many universities, some nonprofits and some government entities, especially Ministry of Health and Agriculture in the countries we work in, because you absolutely have to do that. But then we work with a whole bunch of startups and private sector partners. And frankly, I prefer working with the private sector way more than with the nonprofits, because most of the times I know exactly what the private sector people are thinking. But with the nonprofits, it's sometimes hard to guess what they want out of it. But these partners are not engaged through the life cycle of a venture. They go in and out as need be. So when we start off, there are more universities, nonprofits involved. Like this, I had a picture of the Children and Youth Empowerment Center. They have 200 former street-dwelling youth, and our students work shoulder to shoulder with these former street youth to get stuff done, to do their field testing, try business models, whatever it is. But as we move forward, we work with more and more private sector partners. Our intellectual property strategy is please infringe. We take every single thing we do and we put it in the public domain. We publish everything, every single thing. But at the same time, we figure out ways to carve out our know-how and actually license our technology to several companies. So that's another, I would say, a really cool thing where you can have it both ways. You can put it in the public domain, get the know-how and license it and make a little bit of money on it. But the goal is not to make money. The goal is to have a direct say in how things run and help them succeed. When we license our technologies out, ultimately, it does not end when we sign on the dotted line. It starts when we sign on the dotted line. And after we have done the licensing deal, we work with these people to establish value chains, figure out how their customers are going to get access to credit the entire 9 years. And we sell them the ensemble. So it's not just the technology, but it's the training that goes with it. It's everything down to the design of the certificates. It's the whole enchilada. It's like a business in a box. And we think about how are all those things connected from day one. And the third key takeaway is an issue of funding. What's really exciting to me is that the nature of funding is changing quite a bit, and most donors are now interested in market-centric approaches, and that's absolutely brilliant. That's brilliant. But at the same time, what does it mean for me as an academic program in a university? We can't easily go after some of these funds. So we recently got a grant from the USAID Securing Water for Food program. This was really competitive. They got 520 proposals. They ultimately went through 4 rounds of 4 screening rounds, and they funded 17 of these. And it's basically $500,000, and you're expected to come up with $225,000 in a cost share, which a university would probably never do because all this money is directly flowing out. And so we are working with an external nonprofit. They hire professional grant writers. We take our IP, our expertise, work with them to get the funding, and then these are experiences for our students to go out, and the next CEO of this company is going to be one of my students. And that's the perfect experience they need while we are having the impact and we are managing the funds a lot more wisely and a lot more frugally than they would be managed within academia. So this is a very different model, but we have to open up to this because a lot of these funding pots are otherwise going to be inaccessible to us at universities. And this is the way to get more impact. The third area is about reframing research and reframing the meaning and the purpose of publications. So that's what I do, right? I write fiction and I write nonfictions, proposals and publications. And why research and publication? And the answer is very simple, and I gave you the answer earlier. The answer is impact. Impact on whom? Impact on ventures, because I'll go through the reasons quickly. It's impact on ventures, impact on students, on the faculty involved with it. It's a win-win situation for every single stakeholder. Why? Because when we do it rigorously, there's a focus on evidence-based solutions. We figure out how to ask the correct questions and build the right product. Enhance our trust in the communities we work in when we engage in participatory research, and we enhance our credibility. The USAID grant that we just got really came out of this one article on quantifying water savings with greenhouse farming, which is going to be presented by Kelsey Cizik in this conference. And that 6-page paper was the basis for getting that funding. So that's how you build trust and credibility. Continuity, those articles serves as a baton from one team to the next. Standing on the shoulders of giants. It's higher levels of engagement from students because they are now forced to do their due diligence, think about every single step to get their human subjects approval. And of course, community education that develops our market. This is incredibly important. When you're out there asking people about how they would use solar lanterns, you're educating them about it, and that's how you're developing your market. And finally, that's what we need to do to collectively change the conversation. When I started working in this field 10 years back, people just didn't understand what the difference was between going to Africa and teaching first grade calculus versus going to Africa and trying to start a telemedicine venture. For them, it was about the same. It was going abroad and helping people. But for me, they are two very different things. And what has helped us is focus on research and showing how this is rigorous, this is real, this is very compelling. And so, 3 quick takeaways. One is let's rethink the purpose of research. The goal is not to fill a gap in the literature. The goal is to strengthen our ventures. The goal is to democratize knowledge. The goal is to inspire and inform other innovators. So while a lot of our work might not be generalizable, it is highly transferable. For somebody who's trying to do microgrids in Nepal and has these challenges, the person who's written that paper is that's my starting point, and I want to stand on their shoulders. So it's highly transferable. And finally, it's about mainstreaming HESE. And one little thing that we have done that has helped us incredibly is to articulate the different frameworks for research articles, because the vast majority of students, when they think about research, they're thinking about the photoelectric effect, and they're thinking about, big stuff that's going to change the world forever and get them a Nobel Prize. But there are other frameworks besides traditional hypothesis-driven manuscripts where you're trying to prove or disprove something. You have non-hypothesis-driven articles, you have literature reviews, you have taxonomies. There's a huge need for taxonomies for every single thing, from technology types to business models to biotic and abiotic stressors that impact ventures. The list is endless. This is talking about a few thousand articles right there that would be very practical how-tos for other entrepreneurs. It's about theoretical models, it's about challenges and opportunities, lessons learned and best practices, design tenets, educational tools, essays and opinion pieces for the more controversial kinds of things, case studies, and finally, make stuff up. Come up with your own format. But please share your knowledge. This is an ethical imperative. If you do something, there is no point doing something and not sharing it with others. And that's important to us. At the same time, we must also remember, has anybody seen this research that came out about 3 days back? Do you know how many scholarly articles are in the world today? It's about 114 million. This study came out just 3-4 days back. It's out of Penn State, so I'm really happy to see that. But 114 million articles, of that 27 million are openly accessible to everybody, no passwords, it's all open. 27 million. 27 million are open. So how many of your articles are going to be read? How many of you, most of you are presenting a paper over here, how many of you are going to go back and read all the articles in the conference proceedings? All of you? Great. 3 of you. Wow, we need to cheer you guys. So the question is, we need new ways. No, it's 114 million in all scholarly articles that exist in the world. And 27 million of those are available without passwords or paying fees. Including this one. Good point. All right. So there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of great research out there. We need to find new ways to get that to the people. And when you're working with students, one of the challenges is you can't get students to read 30 papers in the first 3 weeks of classes to get them up and running. And so you need to innovate. You need to figure out how. So my challenge is, how do I get my students to understand what were the economic choices made by this entrepreneur? How did he get access to capital? What does a day in his life look like, and how can we work with him to help him scale up his business? Or what is this woman thinking? Is US aid, is aid from the American people, is it a burden or is it a blessing? And how do you convey these concepts? There are many different ways to do it. Some of our, ultimately it comes down to this question. We talk about we want to go somewhere and teach people how to fish. Well, most of the people I work with in Kenya, Mozambique, Sierra Leone are excellent fishermen. They know how to fish. But the problems they face are very complicated. And how do we get students up and running, understanding these challenges before they get started? And we've been doing this in many ways. We've got a video series in the importance of indigenous knowledge when working with communities. We've developed personas for various stakeholders in the agricultural technology food value chain domain. We've got an example-centric design tool designed by one of my best students ever, Rachel Dzambak. And we've got a bunch of other innovations. And one of them is a personal project that I did over 3 years, where the goal was to take personal experiences gained, 21 years growing up in India, 10 years working in Africa, those personal experiences, integrating them with community perspectives, development concepts, the larger knowledge base, primary research, facts and statistics, best practices, a little bit of Bollywood drama, and a whole bunch of custom illustrations to weave a set of stories that I call the Kochia Chronicles. So these are actual stories with real characters and protagonists, and they face all kinds of issues. They figure out how to address some of those challenges. It's actually a book. You don't have to buy it. You can actually download it free of cost from ResearchGate. So just get onto ResearchGate and you can download the book. And it gets into a whole bunch of things. One of the early stories takes a deep dive into community traditions. And the best way to understand how communities work is to step into their weddings and step into their funerals. And this one, I took the other side and I went to a funeral, and I understood what happens when somebody in Western Kenya has a funeral and they end up spending 10 times their annual income. Think about it, 10 times their annual income on a single funeral. Because that's exactly what happens, and those funerals end up killing the people. And how does that happen? Why does it happen? It's kind of captured in the story, and then it talks about how those traditions can actually be leveraged for social innovation. Those are some of our challenges. That's where we need to look for solutions. It gets into this meaning of community. I have a story. I've been working with the former street youth for about 7 years, and this gets into, it's kind of an expose of the orphanage business, because in a country with 43 million people where 6 million are highly vulnerable, orphanages are a business. And how does this business work? And how do we educate donors to make sure that these businesses are run more ethically? Get into issues of gender equity in secondary education, motivating and incentivizing people, which is extremely important. The second last story gets into this challenge of fishing and why teaching people how to fish is kind of naive. It talks about how millions of livelihoods are impacted by the hyacinth in the lakes in the Great Rift Valley. This affects millions of fishermen. And what can be done in terms of resource-driven entrepreneurship and lean and inclusive business model, where it's not just 1 or 2 people making money, but a whole bunch of people all making money at the same time, because that's the only way to sustain it. So it talks about these very practical business models. The last story is actually dedicated to all of us. It's dedicated to all us Mzungus, white people, and when I'm in Africa, I'm also a white person. And it's about a bunch of Africans sitting around and having a traditional drink and wondering, why do these Americans spend tens of thousands of dollars to come here and paint our walls or dig enormous holes? Like, why do they dig holes? And this is real. I've seen holes dug by outsiders in so many places I've been to. Why do we do that? It's hard for them to understand. And it basically talks about how we need to understand the overlap between their social and economic networks better, understand how their relationships work, and understand how to work together to advance the game. So the key learning objectives here are systems thinking, focus on self-determination. So I should have said this earlier, but the fundamental principles of our work are self-determination. It's not about bringing them something or bringing progress to them. It's not about doing something for them. It's all about figuring out what they want and helping them do that better. It's about melding our knowledge and their knowledge together, because more often than not, they have more knowledge about their problems than we ever will. So it's about self-determination, it's about empathy, it's about equity, it's about ecosystems. It's about building relationships. It's about lean business models, social innovation. And these are big concepts. These are hard to explain. They're very vague, and that's why the idea is to use the medium of stories so everybody can make their own meaning. Ultimately, it comes down to two things: how things work and how do you get stuff done in resource-constrained settings, so that before we send our students out to change the world, they work with people to understand what their world looks like and make sure that they change the world only if the people want it to be changed. The last thrust, and I'm going to get to this very quickly, is about changing the conversation. And this is something I feel about very strongly. And this is something I find myself in a very frustrating situation at times. And it comes down to 3 things. One is What are the motivations for engagement? Why do we do what we do? There are different philosophies of engagement. And I won't tell you what my philosophy is, but I will tell you what we found when we spoke to, when we looked at the blogs of students that are involved in my program over the last 5 years. So the first question we asked them is, why are you here? What's in it for you? And we analyzed this data, and here's what we found. For men, the number one reason was making a difference. Second reason was participating in an exciting project. And third was applying theory to address a problem. But for women, the responses were very different. The number one reason, which actually did not even appear in the reasons for men, was to become a global professional. The second reason was making a difference, and third was, again, applying theory to address a compelling problem, to take what they learned in classroom and apply it in a real-world setting. So those were the key outcomes, but for both genders, this is important. They explicitly talked about making a sustainable difference. It was not about going somewhere and helping somebody, but building something that lasts. And as we in engineering figure out how do we level the playing field, how do we get more women in engineering, women in entrepreneurship, both of which have a real problem, we need to think about this some more. While the narrative of changing the world and making a world of difference will work for recruiting more women, that's not going to keep them engaged. That's not going to help us with retention. If we want to retain them, if we want to bring the best out of them, we have to build entrepreneurial ecosystems that get the job done, that get them into places, that get them into careers they want. And that's the part that bothers me. My program is not a vehicle for ABET to develop soft skills. It's not a vehicle for my college to get students to be better communicators, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Yes, that happens. You will see that in all the presentations today. That absolutely happens. But that's not the goal. The goal here is very simple. I want my students to go out and change the world, and I want them to actually seriously do it. I want them to think about this as a real career pathway. What are those career pathways? They are not well defined. And that's another thing we are working on right now, because this is a question I get almost every single day. So over the last year and a half, this has been a tough project. It just drags on because everybody is so busy. But essentially, over the last year and a half, I've spoken to about 60 people who leverage the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, math, in their work to directly improve the human condition. Half of them work in the US, half of them work in developing countries. And they do all kinds of things. They work for diverse organizations, everything from the Army Corps of Engineers to various kinds of nonprofits, to large industry, to various consulting companies, to making movies, to whatever else. But for all of them, it's all about STEM. Here's what they told me. Here's what I've learned from them. All of them are highly professional, they are independent, they do very innovative work. Practically all of them went to grad school. And when they didn't, their salaries reflected. There's a balance of fieldwork and paperwork. All of them engaged in very meaningful extracurricular activities. For all of them, practically all of them, STEM education was not just about the calculus and the equations and the circuits. It was about developing an analytical mindset. It was about problem solving. All of them took a very circuitous path to current position, which made me feel really good, because I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And the salary range was really wide, from $30,000 to $300,000. This is important. The median salary was about $75,000. And what that tells me is that for somebody who is trying to decide, I've got student loans to pay, should I get a job with Boeing or Lockheed Martin or Intel and all great companies? Should I go work for Intel? Should I go work for this social venture, but I'm not going to make as much money? The difference is not that high. Over time, they can make good enough money. It might be a little less, but it's decent enough. It still makes you feel complete. And the number one advice that they had for students was, of course, go to grad school, do more meaningful things, work across disciplines, step up, get stuff done, take the plunge, and do it now. Now. There's an urgency of now. So we need to change the, where am I? All right, so we need to define these career pathways. We need to make students aware of these career pathways. And I'm hoping to have about 40 of these pushed out by the end of the year and the entire project completed by sometime next year. But strike it off the records. The last thing, and my big question is about broader engagement. You know, we cannot advance this field further if it's just all of us talking to each other. About half the people I interviewed talked about how they learned about this field and about this as a career pathway when they went to an Engineers Without Borders professional meeting. That's great. We need more meetings like those, Engineers Without Borders, Engineers with Borders, you know, whatever it is. We need more of those meetups. We need to engage the broader audience. And so hats off to forums like Engineering for Change for fomenting that dialogue. They have over 700,000 followers on Facebook now, which I think is brilliant. And we need to just keep working on that engagement further and further because we really need to broaden the conversation. And finally, this is my little contribution to broaden that conversation. It's a daily cartoon series to get people outside of this field to learn a little bit about working in developing countries, about humanitarian engineering, about social entrepreneurship, about different cultural constructs and how they play out, and you know, and enrich our lives and things we need to be aware of. All right, so in essence, 4 things. It's about execution, execution, execution. Google did not come up with the first search engine. Chipotle did not invent the first burrito. They perfected it. We got to figure out how do we get our technology in the hands of the people. We need very practical partnerships. We need to change the conversation about research. We need to build a rigorous, compelling body of innovators and problem solvers. It has to be something that when faculty come in an interview, this is what they want to do, and the college says, yes, that's what we want. We don't want you to just be tinkering in your lab. We want you to go out and solve the damn problem. Solve it, solve it, solve it. Execution, execution, execution. And of course, we need to change the conversation. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking to each other. We need to keep we need to build ecosystems that foster multi-million smile enterprises. That is the holy grail of social entrepreneurship. That is the holy grail of the engineering profession. Thank you. Do you have a couple minutes for questions?
We have 30 seconds, so we can take one question. Anybody?
I have one. Nobody else does? Go ahead, back there.
Are these first-year level engineering courses? I wasn't very sure at the very beginning of the part that you mentioned.
So all our courses are senior level courses, but they are open to everybody from freshmen through 4th-year PhD students. So we get all of them together in one class.
So is there a specific discipline they come from?
Our classes are in engineering design, but the students come from everywhere, half engineers, half from everywhere else. And we specifically go out and recruit across colleges.
Okay. And finally, I know that you mentioned about PhD and so on, so which means it's all like a group-based work mostly?
Yes, and they are multi-year ventures because one semester is barely enough time to fail once. You have to fail 20 times to get stuff done. So they pass the baton on from team to team over multiple semesters.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much, Khanjan. If you have any other questions for him, please grab him during the break.